Hello and welcome to Antinatalism this week. Lawrence Anton's YouTube channel is fast reaching well-deserved 5,000 subscribers. And to celebrate the occasion, he will be organizing a fundraising live stream, Ask Me Anything, where you can ask any questions that you want Lawrence to answer. It's not necessary that the question has to be on antinatalism. You can ask any question. You can also submit your questions beforehand using this Google form. I will include all the links in the description. The fundraising is for non-profit organization Family Empowerment Media, which educates people about modern contraception and accessibility. The goal is to raise £100 and any donation raised up to £100 will be matched equally by 3 other donors. So your donations would be quadrupled. So please subscribe to Lawrence's channel if you haven't already, and then send your questions through Google form or ask them on the live stream, and of course donate for a good cause. tls.co.uk is a weekly issue which reviews books among many other things. There was an article in there by Nikhil Venkatesh, To Be or Not to Be. Should we delay human extinction? The article reviews 2 books, one by Elizabeth Finneran Burns, What We Owe to Future People, and second one by Tim Mulgan, Philosophy for an Ending World. Now, how should we use the resources that we have today is a common question we get to hear. Should we conserve them and use only what's needed, or should we just splurge extravagantly like there's no tomorrow? An important aspect while answering this question has to do with future generations. If we conserve the resources today, then let's say that the people from 300 years in future might benefit from it, as they would not be living on a destroyed planet. This is conservation approach. On the other hand, if we don't care about those future people and just use everything that we could, then those future people would be living on a planet with less resources. This is depletion approach. Most people generally agree with taking conservation approach. That is, we should use only what we need and make sure that we leave resources and a livable planet for our future generations. Philosopher Derek Parfit agreed with the conservation approach but struggled to justify why it should be chosen over depletion. Generally, we tend to imagine that someone who is born 300 years in future complaining that their life was made worse by the choices that we make today and therefore think that they are harmed by our actions. The crux of the matter is we think that for someone to be harmed, they have to be put in a worse condition than they could have been otherwise. So for example, if I have a knife, I can either choose to do nothing with it or stab you with it. And since stabbing you would be worse for you than not stabbing you, we can say that by stabbing you, I'm harming you. And so those future generations would be worse off when we choose depletion approach, and therefore we think that we should select the conservation approach. But that's not actually true, because economic policies don't simply affect living standards, they also affect which people exist. So depending on the approach that we choose, conservation or depletion, a completely different set of people would come into existence after 300 years. If someone works on a wind farm instead of oil rigs, for example, or travels by bus instead of cars and so on, the change in their schedules will create a different child. That child in turn will create yet another different child, and in 300 years we'll have almost a different set of population. Now, whether the number 300 years is accurate or not here is not relevant. The point is, if we choose depletion approach, we cannot say that we are harming those future generations, because they would not have been put in a worse condition compared to any other condition, as they would not have existed otherwise. But it seems intuitively wrong to choose depletion approach. This is non-identity problem. There are many versions of it, but this is the version in this article. One way to solve this is to change the criteria. Instead of focusing on the harm that will be caused to the individuals, we should try to attain maximum total welfare of the population. This is total utilitarianism, but this has problems of its own. For any given population which has some amount of total welfare, it is possible to decrease individual welfare and yet achieve higher total welfare by just increasing the total number of individuals. So for example, let's say there are 100 people and each one has 10 units of welfare, so the total is 1000 units. Now instead of this, we can have 1000 people with 2 units of welfare per person, and that would make 2000 units. units. This can also be shown graphically, where on the x-axis we have two population sizes and y-axis has welfare per person. The green bar here is a smaller population with each individual having good quality of life. But on the red bar we have large population, but each individual within it has very poor quality of life. And if we want to maximize total welfare, then we have to say that a large population with poor quality lives is better than a small population with good quality lives. That is what Parfit called the repugnant conclusion. It is repugnant. I mean, by this logic, large slums like Dharavi in Mumbai or Kaiberia in Kenya are better than some of the most sought out neighborhoods in other parts of the world. Okay, so what could we do? We can't justify conservation approach on the basis of harm to the future individuals, and we can't do it with the total utilitarianism either. Elizabeth Finneran Burns provides an alternative. First, she shifts the focus from welfare of future population to our moral duties to future individuals. Secondly, she provides a different framework based on contractualism. We can think of having a contract with the future individuals, whoever they may be. Now, a contract by definition is based on agreement between two or more parties. If there is a disagreement on any of the terms within the contract for any of the parties, then any action based on that term is morally wrong. She refers to an example of a black man who is denied a seat on a flight for racist reasons. This denial is morally wrong even if that flight goes on to crash and the man's life is saved. That's because a service provider has broken a social contract. That means an action is morally wrong even if someone is not made worse off by that action. Similarly, the future people in depletion reject a principle that allows the present day policymaker to choose depletion, not because it will make their lives worse, but because it will impose on them certain burdens associated with living in a more depleted world, burdens that could have been avoided, albeit at the cost of their own existence. One might argue that those future people cannot become a party of a contract unless they exist. Well, in that case, if we choose conservation approach, then the depletion people would not exist anyway, so our problem of justifying conservation approach is solved. Thus, if we choose depletion, we create people who can reasonably reject our choice. But if we choose conservation, there are no such people. So we have found a solution to justify conservation approach without having to face non-identity problem, nor do we have to resort to total utilitarianism. And so we have avoided that repugnant conclusion as well. But Nikhil thinks Finneran Burns has a flaw. The flaw is that if the depletion case people could complain against our actions because they would be burdened with the sufferings of life, then conservation case people could also complain because even if their lives would be better than the depletion case people, that does not mean that their lives would be free of burdens of sentient existence altogether. That means anyone in future could complain against their own creation because of burdens of existence, and that leads to antinatalism. Now, even though it is a flaw in Nikhil's view, it makes perfect sense if you are an antinatalist. The article further goes to explain Finneran Burns' view on extinction. In a choice between extinction in 200 years and in 2 million years, Finneran Burns says there is no reason to choose the latter. In either case, people will die, and if we go for the former, the large number of people who would exist under the latter can't reject our choice since due to our choice, they do not exist. That was Finneran Burns in her What We Owe to Future People, a contractualist account for intergenerational ethics. Tim Mulligan's philosophy for an ending world approaches this from another direction. Here it is given that we are going extinct. Like say some star has exploded somewhere in a corner of our galaxy and its highly dangerous radiation will reach us in another 200 years. So the question Mulligan asks is, what should we do in this case? For a lot of people, meaning in their lives comes from the hope that they have for future generations. But the last generation, 200 years from now, in this particular scenario, which will face that radiation, would not have that luxury. They would not be able to construct meaning around their own future generations. So knowing this, should we still procreate? Mulligan says if we have to procreate in such a scenario, then we must inculcate into our children the ways to construct meaning in life which does not involve future dependent projects, so that eventually when that last generation appears, they would be equipped with intellectual resources to have their own, albeit short-lived meanings which don't need future generations. Now, this is a thought experiment. What's the learning from this for the world that we actually live in? Mulligan says that the meaning that we extract from projects today will eventually diminish, and so we must provide our progeny with the intellectual resources to construct new meaning if we have to continue reproducing. So overall, Finneran Burns' new book provides some new answers to the old questions about procreation, future generations, extinction, and antinatalism, whereas Tim Mulligan seems to be asking new questions about the meaning of life and its relation to procreation. There was a video on the Wall Street Journal's YouTube channel, Why Musk and Other Tech Execs Want As Many Babies as Possible. It talked about, of course, Elon Musk's pro-natalist position, and it referred to Sam Altman and interviewed some learned demographers, and also had an interview of Simone and Malcolm Collins, who want to have 7 children. They already have, I think, like 4 children which were artificially gene selected. The video shows Simone walking on a treadmill with her baby strapped to her chest as she reads from a computer screen with an automatic rifle hanging in the background. The symbolism was almost like as if these children were brought here at gunpoint, figuratively speaking. But you should check out comments under the video. They were all negative. It was like Collins were actually discouraging people from having kids by setting an example of how not to have them. But leave aside all of that and let's have a look at the main arguments made in the video. The argument is that our economy, our social structure, and civilization as a whole will collapse or crumble if we don't have enough production of humans to work for us.
Fertility collapse means we may enter a state in which the global economy is shrinking every year on average. We simply didn't build the global economy with this potentiality ever in mind. When this happens, the entire economic and geopolitical system that our world runs on will begin to fall apart.
Now, the argument sounds logical because it is talking about fixing the system which is about to be broken. But we should look at the premise on which it is based. The premise is that the system is fundamentally good and we ought to have it running for as long as we could. What is that system? Let's have a look.
Cultural changes can take time. But the Collinses say that having Musk and other Silicon Valley executives behind the cause helps get the word out.
I think one of the reasons why Silicon Valley is also into pronatalism is because it is one of the few areas and groups of people where people have the luxury of thinking in terms of the long term. When you look at venture capitalists, they're looking 10, 20, 50 years out often. And that's where you're going to start seeing the ramifications of demographic collapse.
So that's the system where rich people in richer nations are worried about continuation of human species. All the while, when they benefit from the inequalities that exist in the world, the dog-eat-dog culture, and it is the winners of this system who want to keep it going. Now, this might sound a little too harsh or too leftist, but as antinatalists, we should look at the cost that is paid to keep this system running. The cost is paid by children, which are seen as instruments, as mere means to fix our problems. The same children who will have to go through a lifetime of suffering and will have to create more children in turn to keep the fire burning. On Cambridge Quarterly Healthcare Ethics was a new research article, Bioethics and the Value of Human Life, by Mati Hairi. The article deals with the scope of bioethics and whether ideas like antinatalism come under its purview or not. Now, for lay people like me, we should note that in simple terms, bioethics is just ethics of medical and biological research. So it has some overlaps with antinatalism in the sense that the topic of reproduction is actually a biological reproduction, and it needs a lot of medical attention in case of humans as medical care, for farmed animals as breeders' concerns, and for wild animals as wild animal welfare. It also has overlaps when there are questions about abortion and even when talking about pain, suffering, and sentience and so on. Now, this particular article is in response to Michael Cook, who is editor of BioEdge, which is a newsletter about bioethics and an online magazine, Mercator.net. Cook says that without an unconditional commitment to the value of human life, a discipline like bioethics is in danger of losing its coherence. In response to this, Mati asks questions like, does being a bioethicist, doing bioethics, require an unconditional commitment to the value of human life? And if it does, what do life, human life, the value of human life, commitment, unconditional commitment, and bioethics mean in this requirement? To this, Mati presents different views of bioethics. One is conservative view. This view has unconditional commitment to all human life and only to human life. That means all humans, irrespective of whether they are fetuses, embryos, children, disabled, and so on, all human life is morally valuable, but non-human life is not, or at least there is no unconditional commitment to valuing non-human life. Another view is commitment to respecting all life. Here, anything which is living deserves moral consideration, and all embracing reverence and awe towards every form of life. Then there are bio-utilitarian thanatoethics. Mati says bio-utilitarians lean on the concept of sentience and psychological personhood as the foundations of life's value. It considers sentient humans, non-human, transhuman, and post-human beings, but it focuses on having lives more than being alive. Mati also explains the journey of earlier bio-utilitarians where they mainly dealt with abortion, infanticide, euthanasia and so on. And so this discipline was also referred as thanatoethics. So in all of these views of bioethics, where does antinatalism fit? If we say that only humans are to be considered in bioethics, then there are many antinatalists who consider non-human animals too. What does consideration even mean? If it means valuing existing life, then antinatalism is not about existing lives anyway. It has more to do with new lives. Mati considers a few antinatalist philosophers also. One is Patricia McCormack. In her view, humans should go extinct for the biosphere to flourish, so she doesn't value human life in the sense of continuation of human life. Second one is Julio Cabrera, who is also an antinatalist. He values human life in the sense that he is even against abortion, but he disvalues creation of new humans to start with, and he draws boundary on the species level that is only for humans. And then we have David Benatar, who is pro-abortion, values existing humans who have developed conscious interests, and extends his antinatalism to non-humans too. So none of these antinatalist philosophers have an unconditional commitment to human life in the traditional sense. Now, antinatalism is not nihilism either. In simplified terms, nihilism would mean assigning no value to anything. Everything is meaningless or mere atoms, so nothing matters. That's certainly not antinatalism, as antinatalism greatly values prevention of suffering, so much so that it tries to prevent suffering even at the cost of existence of potential lives. But antinatalism can be thought of as nihilism in the sense of commitment to nothingness, and so it won't fit in the traditional bracket of bioethics, which needs commitment to human life. Or antinatalism can be seen as an unconditional commitment to negative value of human life or sentient life. So instead of calling this bioethics, Mati suggests a term OIB ethics, as in ethics of life reversed. He says OIB ethics accepts human extinction and therefore says no to life as a collective phenomenon. Now, I have a few doubts with this. One is, why only human extinction? Can't OIB ethics accept extinction of all sentient beings? And I would guess Mati would agree with this. My second doubt is more of a semantic doubt. Translation of such terms causes a lot of suffering for someone like me, who keeps on thinking about terms in other languages related to antinatalism. But still, interesting points brought up by Mati in yet another well-researched article. There was an article in Oxford Academic's Bioscience section talking about wildlife contraception. The main idea was about how contraception can improve welfare of wild animals. The article goes into details of how and in which scenarios contraception could help, and in which scenarios it would be detrimental to the well-being of wild animals. It says that contraception would help in populations where competition for resources is fierce and infant mortality rate is high. But it would not work where reduced population sizes in some species is bad for the individuals within it. Here's a small diagram from the article depicting the benefits of wild animal contraception. On the left hand side, where the population density is high, it results in increased sibling competition, disease transmission, and conflicts between individuals of same species, called conspecific aggression. In such a case, when contraception is administered, after a period of time, we see increased juvenile survival, better health for parents, and reduced efforts in finding food. Now, the article is not exactly an antinatalist article, but the idea of contraception and wild animal suffering is of interest to many sentiocentric antinatalists. Now, on to some notable videos this week. There was a video in Arabic language which I thought was actually arguing for antinatalism. And then we have Exploring Antinatalism podcast, which had an interview of B.J. Liederman, who is a famous American composer and songwriter, and who came out as an antinatalist on this podcast. Now, if people like him, who are famous in their own professions, use Exploring Antinatalism podcast to come out as antinatalists, then I think it's a great achievement for Amanda and the podcast. So congratulations to Amanda. Now the episode itself talked about so many different aspects: religion, atheism, veganism, different arguments for antinatalist activism, music as a means to do that, and so on. So as always, an episode worth listening to. Alexander L has made a response video to one of my Antinatalism This Week episodes, where I was criticizing him for not being an antinatalist anymore, and I must say I like the way he has responded. I mean, in the manner of response. Of course, there are some disagreements between us, and maybe if I get some time, I'll make a response back. Or if you think we should rather have a direct discussion on a YouTube video or something, please let me know in the comments. An interesting story of Sarah, a woman who wanted to have children but could not, and so she opted to have IVF, and that was unsuccessful, and then she was relieved that it was unsuccessful because she realized that she did not want to have children to start with. That's quite a lot of twists which were discussed in detail in her interview on a channel called Population Balance, which I think is the channel of the organization with the same name led by Nandita Bajaj. There was also a video about antinatalism, its philosophy, Bennett's arguments, activism efforts, etc. in Vietnamese language. It's really interesting to see videos on antinatalism all over the world across cultures and languages. We started with Lawrence and will end with Lawrence, who made a video this week about Philip Larkin, the poet who famously wrote This Be the Verse. Man hands down misery to man, it deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as early as you can and don't have any kids yourself. So was Philip Larkin an antinatalist? To find out, watch Lawrence's video.